Hi ladies, welcome back to my channel. So I wanted to talk about being the villain and why you should embrace being the villain. When I say being a villain, I mean embracing not being the fan favorite, embracing not being people's first choice, embracing rejection even though it is painful, embracing not being popular, oftentimes being overlooked and not being liked. Because when you embrace this, and oftentimes when you are overlooked, rejected, whatever, it signals something that you need to tap into. It signals an attribute about yourself that you have that the average person doesn't have. And that is why you are being rejected, excluded, whatever, because the average person doesn't know what to do with that. They don't know what to do with that because either, again, they themselves don't possess that attribute or they simply haven't encountered it. And so they just don't know how to respond to that. It's kind of like the ugly duckling effect, where we all know the story of the ugly duckling. The ugly duckling was excluded because they were different. They looked different, and so they were treated differently because their family had never encountered someone who looked like them until, they had no choice but to embrace it because they were excluded. One day, they blossomed into this beautiful swan that had unmatched beauty that no one could touch. And that applies to being the villain. A lot of time, and I'm not talking about you being a tyrant or being messy or toxic. If you are having issues with people time and time again, and it's because of your behavior, and you know it's because of your behavior, but you don't want to be held accountable, or maybe you don't want to admit it, then just skip over this video. It's not for you. I'm talking about people who are, for the most part, a well-meaning, wholesome individual. You mind your own business. You're respectful, you're polite, you don't break any laws, whatever. But for some reason, you are excluded, you are rejected, you are abandoned by family, and you cannot figure out why. Especially when you find yourself people pleasing, you find yourself diluting yourself, dumbing yourself down, trying to mold yourself into something more palatable so that you can be liked by others, and still it doesn't work. You're still excluded, you're still rejected. And we see this, yes, it exists with men as well, but you see this a lot with women, where, and this is a phenomenon, if you will, that is studied with psychologists in children, where you'll see boys when they have conflict, and men, and this is a trait that men carry into adulthood, where when they usually have conflict, they'll duke it out with their fists physically, and then that's that. But women, they have a more passive aggressive way of dealing with their own conflict, oftentimes their own internal issues, where they won't confront you to your face. They certainly will not get into a physical altercation with you, where, yes, that does exist, especially in the Black community. But for the most part, women, they will show their disdain for another woman by excluding her, by being mean, by being passive aggressive, by spreading rumors, by quietly telling other women around her and men, hey, did you hear about so and so? They'll drop little hints to try to sully the other person's reputation, but they'll never directly say, hey, I have a problem with you because you said this and I don't like that you said that, or you overstepped your boundaries and I didn't like that, or will not dare to be real to say, hey, I'm feeling bothered by you because something about you that I haven't reconciled yet or I cannot pinpoint triggers me. And so it shows up as being excluded, misunderstood, rejected again. When you're on the receiving end of that, you don't know how to respond. And society again tells you that, in order for you to be well received by others, to have a good relationship with other people around you, you need to be amicable, you need to be deferential, keep your head down, defer to others will and desire, whatever. Okay, like, don't step on any toes, don't piss people off, especially the popular girl, or don't shake things up, or make yourself seen but not heard, but still try to be in the shadows so that those who are in prominence won't feel threatened by you. But sometimes, even when you do that, it doesn't work because your aura, your spirit, your vibe, your energy, whatever, that essence inside of you, even if you don't realize it, shines through your insecurities, shines through your people pleasing, And people can see that aura and they feel perturbed by it. They feel bothered by it. And so they're like, nope, I don't like this. Women, I'm speaking about specifically here again. And that's where the exclusion, the bullying, the misunderstanding comes from. And then you say, okay, I've been doing all these things to be accepted, to be liked, do not disrupt things, and still I'm being met with apprehension. I'm still being met with rejection. Like nothing is working. And a lot of times that's when the villain is born, where people are like, F it, I'm just going to be me. I'm going to no longer care about people's feelings. I'm no longer going to be nice. I'm no longer going to be a people pleaser. I'm just going to continue to live life on my own terms because, you don't like me anyway. So what do I have to lose? I might as well stay true to myself. And at that point is when the villain is born. Not everyone's going to be the villain. So please don't try to pigeonhole yourself into being a villain if that's not who you are. Some of us have to be the heroes, okay? And when I say hero, I'm also not talking about being a mammy and going out there and trying to save people. Some of us need to be the light, is what I should say. Some of us need to tap into and embrace our light femininity, because those type of women are the ones who bring us together. They are the ones who create harmony, inclusion, commit, whatever, all those good things to keep the world spinning. And then some of us need to embrace our dark femininity, because that is what brings justice. That is what lays down the law. That is what keeps things in order so that there is a balance between the light and the dark. Okay, so that's pretty much what being a villain is. Embracing the dark femininity, embracing the fact that you are a black cat and not a golden retriever. Some people will say none is better than the other. They are both equally important. It's sort of that yin and yang effect where you need both to keep harmony and synergy. Otherwise, if everyone is dark, if everyone is the villain, then life is kind of going to be like Gotham City, where it's every man for themselves and there's no light and harmony to remind us of our humanity. But when you embrace the villain side of yourself, it forces you to confront those aspects of yourself that you try to hide, thereby forcing you to grow up and save yourself and come into who you really are, rather than trying to conform to the status quo or waiting for other people to save you. Because when you have that mentality, you defer to people's humanity, you defer to people's goodness, thinking that, as human beings, we all are good, we all have the propensity to be good. And so you're kind of sitting there waiting and hoping that someone will be good to you, when actually you need your dark femininity to protect you, because that person wants to rip you to shreds because they envy you. They do not see you as a friend or an ally. They see you as a threat because you have something that they want or that they lack. And your inability to see that thing is almost, you might as well have a target on your back, right? The target on your back, you can't see it. And, people target it and you hit the ground and you wonder what the heck happened. And then you find out there's a target on your back. And it's like, oh, that's why. When you have those aspects, whether it's strength, wisdom, agility, whatever, and you don't know, number one, that you have it, and number two, you don't know how to hone in on it, that is what makes you a target. And then this is where you start to, it's almost like your sixth sense. You start to tap into and you start to cultivate the essence of who you are, that aspect of yourself that was hidden. And then energetically, I believe that we are energetic human beings, spiritual beings, that we can attract things or repel things based on where we're at mentally, based on where we're at spiritually. And so once you open up yourself mentally to say, I only want to attract things that are going to sharpen these skills, all of a sudden you're going to start to notice YouTube videos pop up that speak to something that turns on that intrinsic value, and you were never looking for that before. All of a sudden you start to meet people who maybe they informally mentor you on an aspect of your life that you were lacking, that you didn't realize that you were lacking in, until you met them and you're like, oh wow, I'm so glad I got to meet this person, because now I've developed a skill or an attribute that I didn't know was dormant inside of me. All of a sudden you are now turned off by certain things that used to hold your attention. So for example, I used to watch Love and Hip Hop when I was in college. That used to be my show, Love and Hip Hop New York specifically, or Atlanta specifically. And now I'm completely repelled by them because I no longer identify with the ratchetness of the Black community. I no longer find it entertaining, even though I would sit there and kind of judge and be like, oh, look at those peasants, look at them groveling and behaving the way that they were. But it's like, well, obviously something in that show is attracting you because you're tuning in week after week instead of diverting your attention to something more meaningful. It's not until I started to mature mentally, I started to embrace and explore other cultures, languages, cuisines. I started to travel more in my city and externally that I started to realize these are childish things, quote unquote, that no longer interest me and they actually repulse me. The same thing will happen to you when you tap into that villain side of yourself, where little kitty things that used to intrigue you, now it's like, I don't care for this. As a matter of fact, I want this away from me because it's so silly. To the rejection piece, because that is a key component of being a villain when you are constantly being rejected by people, even though you are doing the right things that society tells you you should do in order to have a fairly normal social life. When you experience rejection, especially repeated patterns where maybe, for example, you don't do cliques, but maybe you vibe with like one or two people, one or two girls at work, or one or two girls at school, at church, whatever. But when it comes to groups or those same girls in a group setting, they're completely different. It's like, okay, yeah, this is not for me. Don't try to force yourself to be in a group. I don't do groups. Especially when I see certain people and they act different in groups, number one, I just keep it cordial with that person when I see them shape shift like that. But I know that people have a natural inclination to kind of gravitate to whoever they gravitate towards in a group setting. It's just who we are as human beings. But I know that sometimes groups can be a breeding ground for you to be attacked and swallowed up. And so I'll stay away from that. But when you experience rejection, this indicates one of two things. A certain gift or calling that you have is being protected and thereby blocking you from people who could mess things up. Or number two, those are not your people. That is not your tribe. And so instead of you forcing yourself to fit in again, and this is especially true for teenagers, children, like unfortunately you have to go like where your parents go and hang out and frequent. But as you get older, and especially as you enter high school and you go into college, it is your opportunity to meet new people and to tap into the things that maybe you were kind of curious about, but you never had the opportunity to discover it. Now is your opportunity as you get older. And especially if you have access to the internet, there's so many videos on YouTube that you can watch. There's so many books that you can read. There are like-minded individuals that you can connect with on Reddit, for example, who share similar sentiments that you can learn from. That can be your tribe rather than you trying to punish yourself or suffer alone in silence in your family setting or at your church because there's no such thing as boundaries. There's certainly no such thing as emotional intelligence. And people kind of confuse spiritual calling and inclination with just being hyper emotional. Okay. That is more dangerous and that will literally cause mental distress because you are forcing yourself to be something that you are not. That's like forcing a lion to be vegetarian. So embrace the rejection rather than running away from it or trying to fix what's causing you to be rejected. For example, if people shy away from being too close to you at work, they're more friendly with each other, but they choose to be formal with you. That's because they sense leadership, they sense power in you, authority, and that's not to be cocky and be like, oh, look at you, look at me, like I'm better than everybody. But some people are more inclined to be leaders over others, and there's nothing wrong with that. Rather than trying to appear as a friend or try to be chummy and friendly with everyone, it doesn't mean that you need to be rude and standoffish and cold and weird. Embrace the fact that you are meant to be a leader and lean into that. It's like, okay, if people look to me to make decisions, they don't see me as a friend, but they respect me. There's this sense of reverence, if you will, not like in a God complex type of way, but people respect you, then you should be like, okay, let me read up on how to be a leader. Let me get a mentor. Let me hang out or observe at the very least other leaders in the company. Let me go to networking events and talk to people. And you will notice that suddenly doors are opening that didn't open before, because now you've become awakened to that aspect of yourself that was dormant. And now your spirit is inviting things to help feed it. It works the same way with negative aspects, where if you've ever experienced depression, you notice that like when you're really down in the dumps emotionally, if you don't do something to curb that depression or push those feelings aside, all of a sudden you're noticing that you're attracting other people who are depressed and they want to trauma bond with you. All of a sudden you're seeing just a whole bunch of negative content on social media that's making you feel even worse. But then when you decide like, no, I'm sorry, but I'm protecting my peace, I'm going to block that page that is ultra negative. I'm going to stop talking to people that refuse to do the inner work to become better. I'm not going to trauma bond with you. All of a sudden, you're noticing that you're now energetically inviting in people who are more wholesome. And that doesn't mean to say that they don't have problems of their own. Every single human being on this earth, including the most successful, affluent person, has gone through trials and tribulations. But what separates people from winners and losers are people who know how to deal with things in a fruitful way to give them a fruitful result. And a lot of times that comes into them leaning into the hardship, leaning into the thing that they're trying to get rid of, when actually it's a sign that's trying to point you into the right direction for where you need to go with your life. Another thing, if people misunderstand you, don't explain yourself or try to appease them or try to show them that you're one of them. Just be yourself and let them catch up or fall off. This is a great way to weed out who needs to be in your life and who needs to not be in your life. And sometimes it's hard because it's like when you spent your whole life living a certain way, being around certain type of people, it's a comfort to you because it's something that you're familiar with. And it's like now I have to navigate unfamiliar territory. That can be very scary, especially if you don't have an example of what that looks like in someone else's life, especially someone from your circle. You're literally maybe alone. You have no idea what the future holds. That can be scary. And so a lot of human beings find themselves in complacency where they stick with what's familiar because what's familiar is comforting, even if what's familiar is toxic. It's like, I know I've been down this road before. I know what to expect. I'd rather deal with this than deal with uncertainty and potentially deal with danger, deal with something that's hard, and I don't know how to navigate that. But it's when you lean into things that are hard is when you literally allow yourself to blossom and grow and become a better individual. And lastly, when you embrace the fact that you are a villain, you embrace the fact that you are different, it rids you of immaturity that shows up as idealism and victimhood, thinking that others will look out for you and help you when you really need to help yourself. And you hear this a lot of times with religious people where they will place all the responsibility on God and be like, oh, I'm just waiting on the Lord. We have to wait on God's timing. God will show me. But a lot of times for them, that looks like them sitting there and literally expecting God to hand it to them or another religious person to come and be like, hey, the Lord laid it on my heart to tell you that you should move to Chicago. And it's like, oh, you know, I was thinking that maybe I should move cities, and now this random man or woman of God told me that I should move to this city, and I'm going to do it. It doesn't happen like that 9 times out of 10. And honestly, if a random person came to you and said, this is what you need to do, and you call yourself a person of faith, I would question it because it's like, well, hold on a second. I'm a person of faith. I pray every day. I have a relationship with God. Wouldn't God tell me first? God will tell you things first, but a lot of religious people are afraid because they misconstrue the word of God, even though the Bible clearly says that faith without works is dead. And there is a story in the Bible of a leader who, the parable of the 5 talents, the different servants who had different level of talents, and the servant that only had 1 talent buried it and was outcasted, was put out from their leader's presence because they didn't do anything with their talent. Read the book of Proverbs, anyone who's ever read the Bible. And I'm mentioning the Bible here because I know that a lot of my listeners are religious and I come from that background. The Bible speaks very clearly about people who are cowardly, people who are fearful. There's another verse that says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. And a lot of Christians lack faith. They'll say it, they'll fast, they'll pray, they'll be like, yes, I'm believing God for financial breakthrough. But then they never actually do anything to demonstrate that they have the faith. The excuse is always, oh, I'm waiting on God's divine timing. When it's like, God's like, oh, really? Because I'm waiting on you. I'm waiting on you to take that step of faith, to knock on doors, open doors, do the work, pound the pavement, and see what works. When you go on that journey of discovery and trying to seek and find, and that's when you learn valuable life lessons that will help you later on and that will get you to the place that you need to go. But a lot of religious people sit behind and they say, oh, I'm waiting on God. And then they're in their 80s, looking back and saying, oh, yes, I still trust God. God used Abraham in his old age. God used Moses in his old age. And it never comes. They end up dying, never fulfilling the desire of their heart because they allowed their lack of faith, if you will, to paralyze them and hold them back. And that's a wasted talent that ends up being buried along with them. So I say all this to say, embrace not being liked. I know that I keep referencing Christian doctrine. Maybe this is for a Christian who needs to hear it, but even Jesus wasn't liked. And Jesus embraced that. It is hard to not be liked, especially when you're doing everything right. And especially when you see actually toxic, bad people winning and being liked by everyone and having all the friends and having all the fans. Every villain, for the most part, when you hear their story, their villain origin story, it makes sense. It's like, well, now that you mention it, I can see why you're like that. Look at Thanos from Marvel with the Avengers. Thanos wanted to destroy the world. He wanted to destroy half of the world. I don't know how he didn't just say, I want to destroy all the bad people, but anyway. He wanted to destroy the world because he said that, look, there's so much pain and suffering and evil out there. His villain side exposed the side of humanity that needed to be fixed that people like to brush aside. And a lot of times the villain is the cleanup person. Nobody likes them at first, until people realize, oh, they're right. A lot of times scientists and philosophers, they are the rejects and the outcasts of society. Nobody likes them. Actual prophets in the Bible, not like the fake phony prophets of today who are celebrities. Prophets in the Bible, they lived in caves by themselves. They lived isolated from society because nobody wanted to hear their message until people realized, oh, they were right. Oh, that mad scientist was right. That philosopher that would mumble to themselves, they were right. And now we refer back to their scientific research, to their philosophical texts. We refer back to it as gospel today, as ways that we should live our lives. If you are currently experiencing rejection, any of the things I mentioned at the beginning of this video, really take some time to do shadow work. So that is to journal, reflect on the aspects of yourself that may be painful, ugly, unattractive, not popular. Tap into that side and you'll start to notice that you start to cultivate things. You start to attract people and thoughts and ideas and whatever that you didn't know existed, because now you've become awakened to those things, which now signals that you are ready to get to the next level in life. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next video.